Good afternoon and welcome to Pivotal Partners in Retail Leasing, where we discuss opportunities, trends, new approaches, challenges through the lens of a collaborative team, Pivotal Partners, in today's dynamic retail leasing world. My name is Villacrez, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us on this beautiful fall day. I think it's fall, but with that, we'll start off with introducing our Rockstar Panel quickly, starting with our broker, Heather Ewing of Abstract Commercial Real Estate. If you could just kind of raise your hand as we go through. Our banker, Darcy Pinasco, the Assistant Vice President of Business Banking and Development at U.S. Bank. Our builder, Carole Schaeffer, Vice President of Business Development at Freedy & Associates. Our insurance agent, Ross Heginbottom of M3 Insurance. And our attorney, Danielle St. Marie Thompson, co-founder and partner at St. Marie Bowl, LLC. So those are our make up our Rockstar panel today. So what we wanted to do is hear first from each partner, their experience, how they bring value and how they fit into the process of winning great leases and deals for their client. Then we'll weave it all together, dive a little deeper in an open discussion on how to collaborate together to elevate the value of the team. Then there will be time for questions and answers, because we know these days deals are not easy. I know Heather Ewing knows this. So Heather, why don't you start off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, why this is important to you, and get the ball rolling.
Definitely. Thanks, Vic. Well, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Heather Ewing. I am the founder and president of Abstract Commercial Real Estate, located in downtown Madison, Wisconsin. And we are a boutique commercial real estate firm. The nice thing about it is that I actually grew up in the area and I've lived here for over 40 years. And the nice thing about that is I really understand the nuances of the various neighborhoods and areas of Madison beyond the demographics. For example, if someone listening is from the Madison area, if you take a step back and think of Monroe Street versus Atwood and Willie, two very different types of unique and eclectic areas, but a very different client base. So having that type of background, along with the expertise in restaurants, retail, fast casuals, and also an emphasis in new mixed-use developments, we're able to deliver both through leasing sales and investment sales, representing tenants, landlords, and developers. So it's really all-encompassing within those sectors, and that's our extreme niche, and also it is the Dane County area. Another plus about that is that frequently master brokers from the larger firms will reach out to me just because of that expertise and work alongside. And I think one of the other nice elements of this also in representing developers from out of state and other people is that you're really able to contribute a very unique subset of skills that is not held by a lot of people. So it's very niched, and that has been very beneficial both for myself and then also clients that I work with. And with that, I do have to put a shameless plug that I am looking for agents. So if anyone does know of someone looking to get into the commercial real estate realm, I would love to talk to them if they've got a couple of years and more of experience. So to sum it up, I would say I see commercial real estate in a really unique manner. I see it as art on a grand scale. And what that ties into is as I bring in great tenants into these new developments, standalones, or older spaces, is that they're bringing a unique food and experience. And with that, then they're living out their life, their passions, and really being able to help their family in tandem that cash flows for the landlord, which is always a plus and what we're going for as well. And with that, it's really enriching the community that we live in. So it's really along my premise of living fully and combining the two.
Great, Heather. It's great that you're growing. Looking for agents. That's a good sign for leasing in general. So great. Thank you. Next, the idea of a team, starts with, having the right, advice, right resources. And I know that, bankers are not normally thought of in that sense, but it's always vital from a landlord standpoint, of having that kind of background, that kind of information coming from a potential tenant. So with that, Darcy, why don't you kind of explain some of the different, experiences you've had, representing or working with small business owners looking to establish, a new space, either in a new build out or a renovated, space. Yeah, that would be something that would be great.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Vic. I appreciate it. So my name is Darcy. I'm with US Bank. I just celebrated my 7th year with US Bank and my 7th year in Madison, Wisconsin. So it's definitely changed a lot in the 7 years I've been here. My passion for running, I picked that up from Heather. And my new game is I run around downtown counting abstract signs as I'm running. So it keeps me focused on the task. I've got over a decade in the banking industry. I moved here from Washington, D.C., so it was a little bit different, but I still have an awesome Capitol view here downtown. So I'm a business banking development consultant. I found my passion for small businesses because I love to eat, I love to shop, and I love to be nosy and go behind the scenes and see how these businesses operate. So in that experience, I see numerous different industries and see some inefficiencies sometimes, and I can add value by, like you said, walking into that tenant space, or when they call Heather, they should already have talked to their banker. Especially after a year of a pandemic and going through different SBA, PPP options, so many found the value of having a relationship with their banker. We have a unique perspective. They know their trade. We know the finance side. So when they go into a new space, we know how to finance, that specific piece of equipment, or how to set up that POS system, how to calculate their inventory, how they're going to stock their inventory, what that cash flow cycle looks like. And sometimes those are just not things business owners look like. They have that trade that they're good at, and they want to just provide that service to the community. I like the small business aspect because it really enriches our community, as Heather said, and it makes Madison specifically a very amazing place to live. So that's a little bit about me and how I can add value to this panel.
Great, Darcy. And so are you located on the square?
I cover Dane County. Yep. So I have an office downtown, but I'm mobile. They gave me a laptop and a cell phone.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. I know a lot of the costs go involved in a new build out or a new spaces, with the TI improvement. And with that, Carole Schaeffer of Frieding Associate, good friend of mine, has been involved in several different build outs in the area. And Carole, why don't you kind of take it from there, talk about how, that is important, how to understand that, when to get, when to get the tenant involved, because, a lot of, there's always this beautiful kind of image that people have of their business. A lot of times, that's not going to, be within the budget. So, it takes a good, good company to kind of walk through that.
Thanks, Vic. As mentioned, Carole Schaeffer, Vice President of Business Development for Frieding Associates. We're a 4th generation family-owned company, general contractors based out of Reedsburg, and just about a year ago opened our Madison office, which is where I'm located. And we do work in a broad spectrum of areas, including aviation, commercial, healthcare, hospitals, manufacturing, municipal nonprofits, office, residential, and lots of retail and restaurants. So that's been a niche for us. We're known quite a bit for our work in the Wisconsin Dells, doing a lot of work with the water parks there, Kalahari and Wilderness and Chula. And we're hoping that we'll get to be known for our restaurant and hospitality work here in Madison, as well as the commercial and industrial. So really excited about the opportunity to be here. As Vic mentioned, when you're putting together your deal, the sooner you can get your team in place, the easier the process goes. 90% of our work is design build, where we're working with our architectural partners and our clients right out of the gates. And a lot of our work comes then from referrals for our clients, because one of our core values is that we aren't chasing projects just for project's sakes. We're looking for relationships. And I think Darcy mentioned the relationships as well. That's really important to us, is to grow those and to have that team. So I'll get into more specific examples as we, delve into the conversation on some of how we go above and beyond. But the importance of having your team in place early can really help save you time, money, and headaches when you're trying to get your lease negotiated and your space built out. Oh, and just as a sidebar, I've been in Madison for 24 years now, and it was a very twisty pace to get here. I kind of started out in state government, worked in local government, have worked for a trade association and been a consultant, and served on about 6 different board of directors right now and many others in the past. So I'm pretty ingrained into the community. So I've got a good sense of Madison and what's going on here. So that's just a little sidebar about me.
Yeah, thanks, Carole. Your effort has made this world a much better place. I tell you that for sure.
Thank you, Vic.
Ross, Heginbottom, insurance agent, another key part of a deal. Most people don't really, kind of think of that, when they're putting together a team. Of course, they're going to think about, I need a broker, I need a construction crew. I'll probably have to talk to the bank at some point. But why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and, the service that, M3 provides through, through being, that insurance component of a deal.
Yeah, we're really trying to fight the stigma of being a redheaded stepchild. We're doing our best. I think, as we talk about this, that the key is being early to the deal and proactive. So, we stress the importance of that too, as well on the insurance side. So a little bit about myself. I'm a commercial account executive in our construction and real estate practice group here in Madison. I've been going on probably 7 years now, just over 7 years with M3. A little bit about M3. It's the largest privately held broker in the state of Wisconsin. We focus both on property and casualty and employee. I reside in home office, which is Madison. We do work all over the state and country. So when we talk about specialization at M3, it's not really based on geography, but industry. So 100% of my clients are focused in the construction real estate space. And how that pertains to our clients is I really have 2 key roles. One is risk management. So in that side is contractual review and the risk transfer, which I think would be important to this. So a lot of the times we get in on the deal, we review the deal and then make sure that the insurance requirements line up. Risk management practices, building policies and procedures to help mitigate the risk on the front end so that insurance doesn't even come into play on the back end. And then of course, placement of insurance, so building a cohesive insurance program that fits the needs and the wants of the client. And so I'm hoping we can elaborate that on in the future here.
Absolutely, Ross. Thank you. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Danielle, having a good attorney that understands leases, that understands kind of the give and take, understands, how to get, the deal put together is important for a team. Plus how to, kind of communicate with the other side, the landlord side. So with that, I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself, your firm, and how you are able to kind of make things happen for your clients.
Great. Well, thanks, Vic, and thanks, Heather, for including me in the group. Ross, if you're the redheaded stepchild, I think I might be your twin in this process. So my name is Danielle St. Marie Thompson. I am a partner and co-founder of St. Marie Bull, LLC. We're located in downtown Madison, but also have a location in Stoughton. I do work all throughout the state and help people moving in and out of the state as well in real estate. My background is in general business and commercial real estate. I've been practicing law for over 20 years, graduated from Marquette, have worked in Madison most of my career. I've also been in-house counsel for several years, which I think has been very beneficial to my practice as general counsel and in commercial real estate. For general business, my primary role has been working with clients buying and selling businesses. And I also work with them dealing with day-to-day issues that could arise, which could be employment, HR, insurance, et cetera. But my big focus also is on the commercial real estate side, where I work with both landlords and tenants in the leasing arena. A lot of retail. I enjoy working with Heather. I've had the opportunity to do that quite a bit, and it's been a great experience. I think clients have been happy. And also one of my other specialties is that I have dealt with clients in a variety of areas like historic preservations and environmental contamination situations. So I do have a background in that. Working for a utility in-house has been a good experience in the contamination side. So my goal overall, though, is to be a good listener. I like to ask a lot of questions. I can negotiate a lease, but I can't do it if they don't have all the parts and pieces in place with the other group of people that are here. So me doing my job alone doesn't really get a client very far. So I appreciate the cohesiveness of a team that's here today, because they do make the whole process very smooth and help the client have a successful business.
Danielle, thank you very much. And with that, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of my background. I work for Hovde Properties in downtown Madison. It's a family-owned real estate company. I manage the commercial leasing and portfolio for the firm, and so I do have some background in the team approach through Heather. Heather is has some of our properties listed, and it does make a difference when there's a cohesive kind of approach where we tend to rely on that, and it does allow for more seamless decision making and reliability with the tenants being brought forward. So, with that, we wanted to have kind of an open discussion regarding maybe a case study or two. And, I think, I don't know, Heather or Carole, if you wanted to start, with, in some example of, a collaborative approach, that might be something that would be very interesting to our listening audience.
Definitely. Well, I'll go ahead and jump in on this one. And then Carole, if you want to jump in after, that'd be perfect. For today, the case study I wanted to share was the Bear and Bottle restaurant deal at 601 North Sherman in Maple Bluff. As we all know, retail leases, restaurant leases, it's always unique, no matter which section our expertise is in, whether it's, the brokerage, contracting, lending, things of that nature. I think one of the really neat things about this particular deal was it was a new development, so it was raw space. And for people that are outside of the Madison area or Maple Bluff, I'll paint the picture for you. When you come down Sherman Avenue, it's very old compared to the beauty of Maple Bluff. Maple Bluff is one of the highest income demographics that we have in Dane County. And so it's almost like a water and oil, that it was just really run down, older properties, very disheveled. So finding the right tenant, bringing that right tenant was a challenge, right? So representing the tenant, I had worked with the owner earlier and knew what was important to him. He's a very direct person, which I personally love. It really helps me to narrow my focus and to get clients what they really want. So with that, it took a while to get over the hump of really that North Sherman Avenue road. And I did that through demographics, through also vehicle counts, and also the area was really underserved, which you can imagine if something looks like a pit, right? So in that sense, there was definitely need, but it was really understanding the bigger picture and breaking it down tactically. And with that, over time, he did become interested in it. And then that's where we ended up into the negotiation phase. And again, like you pointed out, Vic, and also Danielle, I think collaboration is really important. I think it's an old concept of where the landlords are against the tenants. I think that's a very outdated scheme. I think through collaboration, you create a lease that really works well and you represent the needs, obviously, of your client. So through that, we ended up increasing the footprint size, the patio that had been approved, we ended up extending. We all know in Wisconsin the importance of having outdoor space and time in the warm weather. Well, we do have those few months. And additionally, with increasing the size of that patio, we had to relocate the bike racks. And again, anyone in Dane County knows moving bike racks and things like that can be sticky situations. And then you also bring on the concern, since it is surrounded by residential areas, of sound and music and things of that nature. The final part of it also was that there was only one liquor license remaining. And in the village of Maple Bluff, after that one liquor license is received, you can't get any more. So it's more open in Madison. So with that, what I ended up doing is really connecting with the owner, understanding his highest values within his lease, through the lease rates, the TIs, obviously increased footprint sizes. And then I spoke on his behalf at the village meetings. And through that, it really helped us to get that conditional use permit. And then when he was in California creating the great menu for Bear and Bottle, I spoke at Plan Commission on his behalf as well. So as we all know, you just really have to have close communications and understand what is most important and the priorities for clients. So with that, it did go really well. His liquor license was approved. The hours were approved. Great landlord in the situation as well. And it just turned out to be a great scenario. And I'm happy to report that this is actually his highest grossing restaurant of all 6. So great. Delivering like that to me is really important. And again, kind of like you had mentioned, Danielle, it's having the good communication, listening closely, and putting their desires first. And also, I think as a broker, my duty is to be very direct about what I feel is best from a cash flow perspective and ways of negotiating the lease to get him his best deal and different attributes of that lease. So it was a joy. And I'm also happy to share that I did bring 2 other tenants into that same development next door. So it's booming, and the village is, people living in the Bluff are very happy. So I'm happy as well.
So Heather, it was in first generation space.
Yes.
Yes. And so did you have everything delineated out? Did you go over the letter of the white box with the construction company? Was there collaboration with the construction company to maybe do some of the landlord work and the TI build out to create efficiencies, or were there 2 different companies in there swinging hammers at the same time?
Right. So each landlord and developer probably, as likes to run things a certain way. So it's also understanding and being respectful of that. And in this particular situation, it was pretty clearly laid out of landlord work versus tenant work. And then there was a little overlap because, as it frequently happens, he did want to get in sooner rather than later, and with the winter and the elements. So they were working side by side at different times and then individually as well. So it turned out to be a great end product. It's a beautiful space. And, even though it was a few years ago, it's always nice to hear the great compliments about his joy in the space and people as well.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it turned out really well. Does anyone else from the panel have any input as to or questions for Heather?
No, I would just say great job on that deal. It really does transform that neighborhood, and you're seeing the evolution of that neighborhood and all the new places go in, and really it helps just add value and build like that community of Maple Bluff. And I stop at Ancora over there almost every morning. So I thank you for helping that neighborhood.
My pleasure.
I would just second that comment, in that when you get something that's the catalyst for more great spaces to come in, because like you said, if it's a kind of rundown, not as fresh as some of the neighborhood around it, and to be able to bring in that piece that then gets the ball rolling to bring in other tenants, that that first one. So congratulations on a great job on that one.
Well, go ahead, Carole.
Oh, I was going to say, if you wanted me to jump in, we're going to each kind of use our own case studies. And I was going to just go ahead with two smaller ones because I've only been with Freedy for a year, but I've been in the industry for 16 years. So working with development and construction. But one of the projects that, one of the things that drew me to Freedy initially is that that's the kind of company that always goes above and beyond. I've seen just in my year there, the number of times that they, like I said, when we're 90% of our work is design build. So we're in there at the front end and we're working with people, and just to see what we bring to the pre-construction and going above and beyond. So just a couple of those cases, both Scott Truel, who's one of our owners, and myself come from a background where we had economic development and government, and he was in Alder and Stoughton and in Madison, and it worked with the political affairs for the Chamber of Commerce. And I ran Smart Growth Greater Madison and had a consultancy that help municipal process entitlement. So we can really help on that end on things, negotiating TIF, but he also, because of the work he did for Wisconsin Power and Light, was able to help. We were in the process of building the vintage brewing company in Sauk City, and their president came to Scott and said, hey, we're looking for a site for another concept. And so Scott went out with him and helped, was able to look at different sites and say, here's what you could build there, here's what we could do there, and was able to really work with them at the very beginning. And then they got into negotiations with what they ended up going into the Gephardt building, which was also under construction at the same time. So that whole negotiation was happening. And so they built what was at that time Tangent while the Gephardt building was going up. And then we're very much involved in actually helping with the design and the concept and all of that. It was just very, very hands-on beyond just coming in, like you said, with your hammers and putting up the walls and but just being very involved in the whole process. And then about a year later, when the Vintage won some major award for their beer, they decided to rebrand, and we came back in and helped putting them to go back to their Vintage as opposed to being Tangent. And so we were involved with that and just came back in. So it's not something where we build the building and run away. You're a client, you're a relationship. We're going to come back in and then help you get that turned over so that you can, have your new Vintage East. So we're really excited to be a part of that. One that I am currently involved with is, and so I won't name the names yet, but we had a broker come to us and said, I have a client. She's looking to have her residential builder do this, and I don't think that's a good idea. So we really think she should be with a commercial firm. So got us connected. And then Scott went and was negotiating with the village in question to get TIF and to help her through her very first commercial project. And at the end of the day, got pretty far down the road, and this flex space ended up not going forward because this individual decided to go a different career route. And so now we are in the process of working with trying to help to get some of those things that can transfer to the next user as opposed to just walking away. So it's one of those where we'll help with, if you need the tax and criminal financing, we'll work with the brokers, we'll work with your architects. We've got great partners in the architectural world, both in Reedsburg and here in Madison. So we can help in that process. So I've really been impressed with that ability to go above and beyond, and the treating people like real relationships and not just a project that you want to hammer out and move on. So those were two that really stood out to me and what we all did for the client.
Well, let me kind of frame it, within our discussion. I mean, it sounds, Carole, that, you and, your company were the pivotal partner in, getting this lease or getting this business going, because, I've seen it where, an individual partner comes in, either be the contractor or the broker, because Heather has done that for us, and has, provided more value than, expected. But that added value, is what it takes, to, get some of these projects done. And I think, when you do start to select, your team, it makes sense to kind of understand that. So I think, that is, a good example. And I know you, and I know that's kind of the value you bring. And, it is pivotal in today's market, because there's a lot, it's different. And in Madison, where there's a lot of regulation and regulatory, the regulatory environment is just hard to deal with if you're a smaller. You don't have a team behind you. You have to create it.
Yeah, we work with a lot of owner operators, and they might be really, really good at fixing cars or doing nails or making food or producing widgets, whatever it is. They're great at that, but this might be their first time doing a lease or a build out or a project. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to really bring that knowledge and being willing to do it, because frankly, if you can't get through all of that, you don't have a project, there's nothing to build. So we're very, interested in trying to help our clients get to the finish line and to work collaboratively with our partners to make that happen.
Yep. Perfect.
And I'll just jump in. I would say too, something, which you kind of hit on, but just to really illustrate it for people, is your connections and years spent with the city. I don't think there's anyone else that has that amount of experience and the connections, which really sets you and Freedy apart.
Thank you, Heather.
Mm-hmm.
Good deal.
I really like your comment about, they might be good at making that food or whatever that trade is, but they don't understand the leasing portion, or it's the same with the finance portion. They don't understand how the kitchen is going to talk to the front of the house for those orders, or what that inventory level is going to look like, or how they're going to accept credit card payments because everyone was afraid of touching money last year. So what does that mean if you're an all cash business? That's where having your banker and having that other opinion, a way of thinking, or maybe you need to open for brunch because Madison loves brunch, but maybe you need to finance another cooler. That's important. And that's what your banker thinks about.
Well, what I like about, the collaborative, approach is that, when you engage with someone, in a small business, basically that's their life. I mean, they are looking, to create a livelihood, which will create family, which will create purpose. And so, there's almost, there's that higher sense that, this is important to this individual. So, they should be, be handled in a way where, it's just not trying to make a commission. It's about establishing someone on their path. And, it can be easily, more easily done when there's other, collaborators on that same path with you. So that's just kind of an observation that, I see it all the time. And, unfortunately through COVID, a lot of, people's small businesses, have, not come to fruition, or maybe even failed, so, it's important we take a very serious kind of attitude towards that. Anyone else have any, kind of really interesting ways that, have, been, successful in getting leases done? I know, Heather, we could talk about some of the deals that, we've worked on, and, with that, maybe I'll just start out and, won't mention names, but, I think when we were working with, the manufacturer that we were looking at, and I think it was a collaborative approach, and you were leading that. So maybe you can talk about as far as what you did and how you were putting it together. I know that it didn't come to fruition, but I thought that the effort was kind of a team effort. And, if you wanted to speak to that, I think that was a great example of what we're talking about.
Definitely. Yeah. So, that's where, just like you highlighted on, Vic, it's the collaboration. And this is where I think it's really great opportunity for creativity. And with that, I think it was great that, even touring on a Saturday or Sunday, I think it's being open to those types of things. And frequently, whether it's in the process of a deal or something, versus seeing a problem, I always like to ask myself, what would it take, right? How do I get to the next step? How do I help bring this together? What can I bring to it? You know, what conversation, you know, with you, Vic, from a landlord perspective and things of that nature. So with that particular deal is that it was weekend tours and also understanding their vision. And that's where you were great too, in collaborating with, you know, we have the dimensions, we have the specs of the space, CAD files, what is their vision, how might it be laid out? And, you know, unfortunately, just with different approvals, they weren't able to build out in the same size footprint that they desired, you know, which did end up shifting things. But the nice thing about that was they had a great experience with the landlord, which is, you know, working with you, Vic, and Hubdy is a great landowner that I love working with. And it's, everyone does pitch in. And it's really, how can we create something great, not only in this space, but also give back to the community. And that's where I think it's really up-leveling expectations and also how we carry out our positions as part of this retail lease deal. That it's not just looking, like you referenced, at a commission check. It's how do we really bring more to the community, to people's lives, and expand it as far as we can. And that's where, too, going through the conditional use approvals, helping with the application itself, breaking down the process, some of the expectations, the timelines, things like that, because we all see it. When someone isn't familiar in an area that we see day in and day out, it becomes easy for us, but we need to remember to kind of bring it back to those new eyes, if you want to say, and help break it down, because otherwise it's overwhelming, and we don't want that. So it's having a good mastery of it and then concisely breaking it down and helping them along the way. And they need to feel that you're open for them, that they can ask questions and get what they need. And also, you know, we all on this panel like to think a couple steps ahead. And I think we're able to do that well because of our years of experience. So you're anticipating what they might need and bringing it in, but not bringing too much in where they're overwhelmed. So that, I would say, is kind of a nice synopsis of that project that we were on together.
Yep. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Danielle, I had a question for you regarding, you know, kind of legal contracts. And, you know, correct me if this is not what, you know, some of the service that you provide, but there are a lot of legal contracts, you know, not only, you know, the lease, but, you know, the construction contract, you know, any other kind of, you know, application. When do you, you know, see yourself, or, you know, getting involved, or how do you see that, you know, as kind of part of the process? I mean, reviewing the LOI, you know, I mean, maybe, you know, you can speak to kind of some of that. So, you know, that would be helpful.
Sure. I guess like anybody, you want to be involved as soon as possible in any transaction. Yep. I rely a lot on Heather and her role when she's working with the tenants and landlords finding spaces in terms of putting together some of the very intricate parts of the deal, which is the space size and how much is it going to cost per square foot and things like that. But you're right, there's a lot of other contracts that come into play. Immediately they start saying, I don't have my business set up. I'm starting a new business. Oh, wait, I need insurance and I need an architect and I need the design people and contractors. And how can I find someone in a timely manner? And so sometimes when I'm in the front end, I don't always do, it's not maybe so much legal work, but it is the collaboration part of saying, okay, I got to reach out to so-and-so to get them started. Heather will get the terms in line, but then you need Carole actually pulls the project and design together, and lending is huge in a timeline and insurance. So it is, although for me, I like to be in the beginning because sometimes it is very hard when I randomly get a document from another attorney and it's all of a sudden to some degree almost appears adversarial. Exactly. It is really good to kind of, I prefer when phone calls are made, I prefer to back away from some of the email processes, because I do think if a landlord is understanding their tenant and the tenant understands what the landlord's trying to accomplish, their relationship will be a lot better. And actually things happen in the lease term. 10-year leases with 2 5-year renewals. That's a long time. So I do think the relationship with the tenant and landlord is so key in the very beginning. And if they can't hit it off, I really do think that people should reevaluate where they go, where they lease, and how they move forward. I do like to ask a lot of those questions in the beginning to see you getting bad vibes. Is this not feeling right? Is this, do you need to look for something else? Because I do need the process to start smoothly. Otherwise, negotiations tend to break down, or people get very angry once they go sign that lease, which is supposed to be a very exciting start to their long-term relationship with that landlord. So I guess, long story short, bring me in the front end to help with the process too.
And the relationship. And I think that's an important kind of aspect of a long-term lease, because it is, going to be, if it starts out on an adversarial kind of tone, it should be something, this is their life, their business, and this is what their dreams are. And, first do no harm to to that. And you're right. At the end, you get a lawyer that, comes in and changes all the terms that you've agreed to. I mean, that energy isn't productive. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Danielle, I had a question for you. I mean, you probably see it from all sides, but you obviously represent a client, but you work with multiple parties. How important is it on your end for kind of be familiar with each other and get along and play nice in the sandbox? Because I can imagine those things probably just drag on and becomes contentious. So, I mean, how important is that for you to have a team around you that, understands each other? Everybody wants it to be fair and equitable. Does that help smooth the process?
Oh, absolutely. It does, because when I know that, and I can just use Heather an example, when she's on, she might be representing the broker and she might be representing the tenant. In different circumstances, I can be involved in both, but she definitely pulls together the relationship between the parties. So that's the great start. I've had circumstances where, clients will say, I had a fire, now our insurance company dropped us, I don't know where to go. Well, they own a significant amount of commercial properties and residential rental properties. They'll come to me and be like, we need help. We need to get insurance in order. And oh, by the way, we're trying to open this restaurant downtown. Can you help us, get that lease in order? And oh, we need to do some other financing matters with this other project. So it has been extremely helpful for me to have a good resource of people that I can collaborate with and reach out to on a whim. Oh, you need another insurance company. Great. Here, I know this person that you should call them right away because you just got dropped. And, again, with the financing, people want to get creative when they're starting new businesses. So it's hugely important for me to have quick resources of people I trust around for the entire deal, because it's not just the lease signing. You have a lot more aspects of the deal, I guess, going forward.
Because you work with historic properties and things of that nature too, right?
I do. And yes, that's not an easy process either. And so understanding that and knowing the people involved is very helpful.
So Darcy, if a business owner comes forward and the landlord asks for proof of funding for the build out and looking for a reassurance that he's going to be able to perform on the lease, how do you handle those discussions and with your tenant or with your client? Do you sometimes get the kind of, well, what do they need to see that for? Or, is it absolutely necessary? I know there's a, kind of a slow process of learning, but, is that something that, having a team or having, kind of a comprehensive kind of picture helps with?
Good question. Heather had said this numerous times. She said cash flow. I'm a banker. I need positive cash flow, right? So it really starts, is it a brand new business, a new owner starting a business? That financing is going to look very different than a current established business that's expanding or, moving into a different space. So having that line of credit, positive cash flow, having your financials in order is very important to constantly have. So, part of this panel, I would add an accountant, because that's really important to have on your side and make sure that they have all their financials in order. And if not, if they're starting out, knowing the community partners like WIBIC or different organizations that are going to help finance these projects, if a big bank might not do that like US Bank, but we have great partnerships with other organizations that can help that process. So again, starting with your banker, I think is one of the most important places to start, and then hooking up with Heather, and then grabbing Danielle, and then grabbing Carole and Ross, and all of us collaborating together. It really is that working wheel that you need to start with us first. You need all of your pivotal partners to be there from the beginning.
Great, thanks.
Darcy, quick question for you. Sorry, I'm jumping in here. As far as a range, because I know you work with people, newer businesses, but you also work with people that are much more established and higher dollar volumes. What's a good range if someone is watching that needs a good lender? What might that range be?
For me specifically?
Right.
I would say anywhere that generates revenue from 500,000 to about 20 million in annual revenue. Industries can definitely vary everywhere from, you're leasing from a restaurant all the way up to a manufacturer. So that's the fun part of my job, is I get to dabble in a little bit of all of the different industries and learn them. So that's kind of a range. It's a big range, but that's a range for me.
Great. Carole, I had a nuanced question for you. And it might, might lend, some value to, a collaborative partnership. Say that you're going back and forth with, you put an estimate together, and for some reason the deal is slowed down 3 months, and you don't have, the lease, or they has to go back and forth between, the broker and the lawyer and the banker. They're just getting on board, and at that time, you go and, your costs have gone up. It's just kind of what we've experienced, recently. Costs are wild, and, steel is not the same it was. And, I don't know if you've ever had that experience, if there's, it kind of, as I said, lends to kind of having all the ducks in a row to start, so you can, prevent that from happening, because otherwise you're going to have to go back and talk to either the landlord or you guys going to have to eat it or whatever if the contract has been signed.
So we've had this situation where and I think every contractor has, where you put an estimate together and it's based on, a concept and some preliminary things, but then when, you can't get subs to hold numbers right now for as long as you used to, just because of the fluctuating materials prices. Now, the good news is that lumber's actually been coming down. So that could be to the advantage of a future estimate, as, maybe the numbers, that were a couple of months ago would have been higher in the lumber department. Steel stays high, and there's still supply chain issues we're trying to get. Like, we've had projects that our start date has had to be pushed back simply because the materials are not going to be available. And when you originally were having the conversations, that wasn't the case. So now that, so there's a lot of those different things that we can't control in terms of the materials costs or the supply chain issues. That said, there's a difference between that initial estimate and then when you actually go out for bid for the job, and then you sign the contract. And the contract there's always, there tends to be, in any project, if things do get changed in a big way, driven by the client, then you have change orders, or there's some sort of unexpected things that can happen too to adjust. But the estimate it's an art of trying to figure out, the estimate based on what you have versus what you end up getting with the actual drawings when you have the construction drawings and can drill down. But it's definitely something that, and again, having us in early, we can help. We've had situations where a client has an idea of what they want, but what they want and what their budget is aren't going to necessarily line up. And so we can then work with the team and say, all right, well, here's what you're going to be able to finance. Well, if this is your concept, here's how we can help you make it as close to what you want without, there's really creative ways that you can value engineer things. So we like to be involved in trying to help make sure they can get their vision, because like you said, these are their babies. This is their, livelihood and things that people are really passionate about. And so we want to make sure that we can deliver their dream, but also help them understand the various components of the budgeting and other factors to consider.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So Heather, we were talking, about kind of the collaborative effort. Did you see any trends, in, retail leasing, that will either make, collaboration more important, or, is this, is the things changing in, a way where we don't really understand it yet?
Well, I would say, that's a good question, Vic. I would say that one of the biggest trends since COVID 18 months ago, it was just really the design build out, which I'm sure Carole's experiencing. A lot of retailers are shifting to the drive-through only locations. Some are shifting where you have to have a walk-up window, otherwise they're not interested in a property. On a grander scale at the national level, for example, like Chipotle, they have their Chipotle lane. So you see more app-driven types of opportunities, especially with these fast casuals. As far as the locals, I think everyone wants a plan B. They don't want to be stuck like they were earlier. And cash flow is huge, and it affects their families and their livelihoods. So that's where they really are planning, not only for now, but also what if something else were to happen, so that way they can mitigate any risk and liability. And that's where I think this collaboration, you're hearing about it now, but it should have been there for a long time. And I think people that have been successful for a long time do have a collaborative style. It really is a great way to help your clients and also to move deals across the finish line. And I think too, it's really breaking it out. And then with the construction, like Carole said, of suggesting things that they may not be aware of. I come in from the brokerage end of suggesting different ideas of, I read magazines from the coast of what's happening there. How can we recreate the space in a unique way that is going to bring more headcounts, thus more cash flow for you? Working with Darcy of really getting creative. And that's where I'd love to hear too, one of your stories, Darcy, of a client you've helped, because you help in really unique ways. So the neat thing with this Pivotal Partners team as well is we're all very creative thinkers. And as you know, I love creativity, and it's so vibrant within what each of us do. And I think that's why we do have the returning clients and really help people at a tremendous level, because they understand that this is something different, it's something unique, and it really provides value. And at the end of the day, at the end of the bottom line, that's what it is providing value, high level of service and caliber. So Darcy, if you could just chime in too about one of your great examples. I know you have many too.
Yeah, sure. So this one may not be so much leasing, but recently, Carole mentioned wood was expensive, right? So we had a client up north had bought a land and with efforts in expanding their warehouse. It was a furniture company, and really it was just going to cost them way too much to build that new warehouse on that land that they owned outright. So it actually ended up being cheaper for them. We're like, hey, what's next door? He's like, a warehouse. I'm like, is it for sale? Maybe it's cheaper to just buy the warehouse next door. And it ended up being cheaper for them to finance this warehouse next door. But it was a creative way because they were just solely focused on building this, land. So then it kind of depth in the conversation, and they're like, oh, we did, during COVID, we opened up an online platform. And I said, oh, good. How are people paying you? And he was like, oh, I didn't think about that. And I'm like, we've got credit card services. That's what everyone wants to pay you with. He was like, surprisingly, the furniture industry was extremely busy because everyone was sick of sitting on the same old couch. So they were busy as other places were closed. But the conversation just kept going, and now they're expanding their facilities. So we're able to finance some of their equipment. We're reviewing their credit card processing to save them money on that. And all of that came through just a general conversation. They were very loyal to their local bank, as they should be. That's a local community bank. They need to be present there with that partnership, but they don't have the technology, I would say, US Bank does, to move that money in the volumes that it's moving electronically and just really make their process more efficient. So that's kind of one unique example of how I try to get creative with my team and find better solutions for our clients.
That's great.
Thanks, Darcy. I did have a question for the panel. What about collaboration between tenants? I mean, are we seeing, stores within a stores or pop-up stores, or, co-tenancy of, spaces? Is that, a way that, tenants are able to kind of share costs and, create, some type of, close proximity synergy for their product? I mean, I don't know if that's, something that is happening now, but, that seems to be, I've seen a few of those instances now where we're, having, like a store within a store, or two stores in one, or, just a question.
I can just say one thing that I'm noticing personally is just a lot of shared office spaces personally.
Yeah.
That's a big one from a retail perspective. I guess I would let anybody else say something to that, but the shared office space has been big in a lot of the smaller communities, and I think that's become very popular. So from that perspective, it's growing, but if somebody has,
that's where my
retail
question came from, that experience with us too, sharing offices. Yeah.
And I think that's an expanding idea too. I think people are now looking for spaces.
Oh, shoot.
I think
Danielle came, kind of got froze there.
Yeah, she's frozen. So I'll jump in. I see it in the larger markets. Locally, I see little bits of it. For example, on the 400 block of State Street, there's going to be pop-ups. You don't see a lot of it, especially in the higher base rent areas, just because the likelihood of the person having the funding, they're not going to have the funding. So you tend to see it in some of the areas where there's a lesser rent, because otherwise, if you think about it, it'd be like going to Chicago and having a pop-up. And if you don't have the budget for Michigan Avenue, it's just not going to work. So I think that's where too, it's accommodating a current trend of pop-ups, but at the same time, it really depends on the location of that. And then I am starting, there is a coffee shop in with a bookstore, which is a nice connection point, but I think a lot of it hasn't really been done at a high degree locally, just because of liability and how, security, how do you secure your product, things of that nature, different timing, who's on the lease. Not that it can't be done, right? Because this is a creative group, but you just don't see too much of it.
Good. Well, we're bumping up against our hour. Is there any last comments by any of the panel members? Darcy, you had something?
I was going to talk about just spotlight Freedy again and kind of look at Plain Spoke and Youngblood. Definitely two separate businesses, but they share that kitchen. That's a really cool, unique way to save some money, right? And I'm sure that is a nice way to keep the businesses separate, but cut down costs on provide food.
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking of Ross and the insurance side of it. Those are two separate entities, but we were in Danielle on the historic preservation. That was a historic building and over 100, but not designated. Right. But it's still a 100-year-old plus building. So getting the approvals on that and dealing with the city and all of the rules and that sort of thing. So because they were completely separate spaces, so I would wonder if there'd be some issues with ensuring multiple businesses in the same footprint if they're not physically divided on that. But yeah, that was definitely one where we created two unique spaces in old buildings.
Yeah, it's a unique problem. I think that's going to continuously happen. I think I saw some issues, with restaurants now with the supply chain getting more expensive. I mean, how do they continue to turn a profit? Well, maybe it's something like, cutting down rent and sharing spaces. I think some of that could be all transferred through contracts, Carole, as a mutual understanding, but you have to get creative. And I think as things continue to evolve, insurance is no different than everything else. It's an antiquated product, but it does have some flexibility when you're having conversations with underwriters and building the program to make sure it operates the way it's supposed to.
It's good to know, Ross.
And I was just going to say, you also run into some similar problems, even if a business isn't combined in the same space. in the older buildings, having those shared wall dividers with fires and issues and problems.
Right.
I know insurance is such a huge thing, and coming to agreements with the parties and being really clear in your documents is necessary, because those things do happen. A lot of issues can happen with restaurants abutting other restaurants, with kitchens and fires. And so a lot of things to think about, even if you're not in the same exact space.
Yeah. The proverbial when it hits the fan, you know, it's going to be a problem. Well, this has been great. It's been a very productive discussion. We're at our time. I wanted to thank Heather, Danielle, Ross, Darcy, Carole. I wanted to thank all the members that tuned in to Pivotal Partners. And with that, there's more to come. And
thank you,
I don't know when the next discussion will be, but we'll be here.
It'll be in a quarter.
Okay.
So it'll be a quarterly event.
Yep. Thank you.
Good deal.
Vic.
Yep.
Have a good afternoon.
Everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Yep. Bye-bye.